Tensions between McLaren and Red Bull in Formula 1 have escalated again, but this time it has little to do with what's happening on track. Instead, this latest chapter in an ongoing feud that's erupted between the two F1 rivals has been triggered by McLaren CEO Zak Brown and his cheeky pitbull stunt in Miami, drinking from a bottle labelled tyre water. It caused some smirks when it was spotted by the television cameras, but there were some serious undertones to Brown's actions. Brown has long been annoyed about the mudslinging he feels McLaren has faced off the back of its recent surge to the front of the F1 grid. The tyre water labels were a clear reference to the accusations Red Bull threw at McLaren late last year about illegally using water in the tyres to illegally keep them cool. Red Bull team boss Christian Horner went to the FIA ahead of the 2024 Brazilian Grand Prix to say that his squad had evidence that such illegal tricks were at play, as he urged the governing body to step in and investigate. The theory was McLaren had somehow found a way to inject water vapour into the tyres, which in theory would help cool the rubber surface and deliver better thermal management compared to other teams. It's a tactic that has been used by F1 teams in the past, but was outlawed many years ago through an FIA technical directive that barred teams from adding moisture. F1's current rules are also clear about what is and isn't allowed, with the focus now being on preventing teams from eliminating moisture from the tyres, as that can have an impact on tyre pressures. Article 10.8.4 of F1's technical regulations states that tyres may only be inflated with air or nitrogen, and any process the intent of which is to reduce the amount of moisture in the tyre and or in its inflation gas is forbidden. Red Bull's complaints were enough to get FIA single-seater director Nicholas Tambatsis to do some digging over the Interlagos weekend, but he found nothing untoward. The end result was just annoyance from McLaren at being unfairly accused of breaking the rules, and a sense that Red Bull had perhaps grown a bit paranoid amid its own alarming competitive slump, and so was throwing out wild theories to try to explain the performance swing in McLaren's favour. That tyre water episode was not an isolated incident when it came to suggestions from Red Bull that McLaren wasn't playing fair. Prior to Brazil, Red Bull had been pushing to get the FIA to clamp down hard on the flexible aerodynamic tricks that some teams, including McLaren, were exploiting. Its complaint eventually triggered the FIA into action as more detailed checks, including video analysis of wings, came into force from last year's Belgian Grand Prix. However, the FIA concluded that what McLaren and other teams were doing fully complied with the regulations, so elected against taking action prior to the off-season. It was only during the winter of 2024 that the FIA eventually conceded it needed to tighten things up to prevent the situation escalating out of control. But it wasn't just at the front of the car that McLaren's flexi wings were under the spotlight, because the rear became a huge talking point too. McLaren unleashed an ingenious design that flexed its rear wing in such a way that the slot gap opened up when running down the straights, thereby reducing drag to help boost straight line speed. This became known within the paddock as Mini-DRS, and it helped Oscar Piastri win last year's Azerbaijan Grand Prix. But with complaints louder on that score as Ferrari joined Red Bull in openly speaking out against it, the FIA got involved and McLaren eventually agreed to make some changes to its design. Off the back of the flexi-wing complaints, the tables turned at last October's United States Grand Prix, when this time McLaren did the complaining over a front bib adjuster it discovered on Red Bull's car. McLaren felt that design, which allowed Red Bull to adjust the height of its bib from within the confines of the cockpit, in theory also allowed Red Bull to make adjustments to the floor height when the car was supposed to be under parc fermé conditions, and therefore untouched in terms of setup adjustments. Having been alerted to the existence of this bib adjuster, the FIA duly applied some seals from Austin onwards to make sure Red Bull couldn't use it in parc fermé without alerting the scrutineers. McLaren's main problem here wasn't the existence of the device itself, but whether it had been previously used while the setup of Red Bull's car should have effectively been frozen between qualifying and races. The FIA admitted retrospective action would be difficult to take, but investigated nonetheless. They spoke to team personnel and even made a surprise visit to Red Bull's factory, but came away satisfied that Red Bull had fully complied with the rules.
While we're on the topic of racing, F1 Clash is back with its sixth and most action-packed season yet. With nearly 40 million players over the last 5 years, this free-to-play mobile game brings the intensity of Formula 1 straight to your pocket. You'll build your own team, develop winning strategies, and race in real-time head-to-head duels, all set against the backdrop of the official F1 calendar. It's fast-paced, strategic, and incredibly fun, whether you're a casual gamer or a die-hard F1 fan. Season 6 brings updated 2025 team liveries, driver stats, rosters, and a brand new DRS feature, giving you more control over your race strategy. Plus, you can unlock and race with F1 legends like Jenson Button, Damon Hill, Mark Webber, and Gilles Villeneuve, with even more legends joining throughout the season. Download F1 Clash now for free on iOS and Android and experience the thrill for yourself. Just hit the link in the description.
While all these technical arguments faded away over the winter, especially with the FIA deciding to tighten up front wing flexibility tests from June's Spanish Grand Prix, it didn't take long for McLaren and Red Bull to resume the mudslinging in 2025. Just a few days into pre-season testing in Bahrain, the complaints began again. The first issue revolved around the return of Mini-DRS, with Red Bull identifying McLaren as one of several teams that appeared to still be exploiting the phenomenon on its 2025 car, despite the FIA tightening up the rear wing regulations over the winter. Lobbying to the FIA about what had been identified using video footage during Bahrain testing duly triggered some increased video monitoring of the rear wings at the season opening Australian Grand Prix. Analysis of what was spotted in Melbourne then opened the door for a tightening up of the rules for round 2 in China to stop teams playing around with the slot gaps to try to boost straight line speed. We understood 4 teams to be under the FIA's microscope back then: McLaren, Ferrari, Alpine and Haas, but only Alpine eventually admitted to having to alter its rear wing design in response to the latest clampdown. The flexi-wing issue quickly fell away, but has now been replaced by a new source of tension between the teams, with McLaren clearly enjoying a huge advantage when it comes to managing rear tyre temperatures, and this being key to dominant victories in Melbourne and Miami in particular. Intrigue has naturally increased over exactly how they're destroying the opposition in this way. Rivals are confused, and that has inevitably prompted talk that McLaren could somehow be exploiting a grey area in the regulations. Focus has narrowed to the way McLaren is cooling the outer surface of the rear brake drums, which would help stop the wheel rims and tyres that sit over them getting too hot. It's understood that thermal images Red Bull obtained from an outside party, which revealed some intriguing cold spots on the McLaren rear brake drums, have been shown to the FIA as part of an ongoing dialogue about how McLaren appears to be running things so much cooler than everyone else. The regulations are absolutely clear that teams cannot use liquids to help cool the brakes, so that rules out using water or anything similar to try to help with keeping the drum temperatures under control. But despite ongoing sniping and even some suggestions over recent weeks that McLaren has been forced to change its design, McLaren itself insists there's nothing untoward happening, and it's all simply down to clever engineering. And Zak Brown was emphatic in Miami that at no point had McLaren been asked by the FIA to change anything on its car regarding tyre or brake temperature management. No, nothing was his blunt response when asked directly by the race about any dialogue with the FIA over this matter. Red Bull's questions to the FIA about what McLaren is up to prompted the governing body to look into what's happening at the rear of the MCL39, and we understand the FIA has inspected the McLaren brake design in recent races to find out what's going on. However, multiple checks by the FIA, including a more detailed inspection after the Miami Grand Prix, have given McLaren's rear brake design the all clear as a clever but legal concept. We haven't yet seen any formal documentation about the results of that Miami inspection, and may not get it until the eve of the next race at Imola. If it was part of the extra extensive physical inspections that the FIA does on a selected car after each race, that will not be officially put down in writing until the next event. But the fact there's been no alert about anything untoward happening suggests there will not be any surprises when that documentation finally appears. While conspiracies have floated around about why McLaren's advantage has fluctuated so much over the course of the season and whether this has been linked to potential FIA interventions, the bigger link appears to be between McLaren's pace and the prevailing heat or track conditions. Miami, where McLaren's nearest rival finished more than 33 seconds behind, appears to have been a perfect stomping ground because both air and track temperatures were the hottest we've seen all season. Australia was overcast and cool, China and Japan cold. Then, while Bahrain and Saudi Arabia were both warm, both events were also staged at night, so the asphalt surface was not being heated by the sun, and that triggered a different interaction with the tyres. McLaren's advantage clearly ballooned when the tyres overheat. It was there when worn intermediates were being used on a drying track in Melbourne. Even though the track itself was relatively cool, it was there again in Bahrain, where the harsh track surface makes tyre temperatures difficult to manage regardless of the fact the sun isn't out. And it was there again as Max Verstappen struggled to hold the McLarens back as the first stint of a very hot Miami Grand Prix wore on. It's not obvious right now if the FIA clearing the McLaren rear brake design will be enough to dampen down intrigue or stop fresh Red Bull probing for the source of McLaren's competitive advantage. But behind Brown's water bottle stunt is a very serious idea that he thinks the FIA should consider, amid his own team's frustrations at always having the accusing finger pointed its way. This idea is that if a team wants the FIA to formally look at some element of a rival's car that it suggests might be illegal, then it should be forced to lodge a payment, the same way as when official protests are made. Brown reckons this would need to be a meaningful figure, and one that comes out of that team's cost cap. So if accusations were frivolous, it would cost a team money that could otherwise have been spent on car development. He reckons teams would not waste $1 on anything that did not add performance. But Red Bull team principal Christian Horner is not convinced that such an idea would be very useful. He referenced McLaren's own behind-the-scenes questioning of Red Bull's bib adjuster in 2024 and said in Miami that it's only natural for teams to probe what others are doing, as they have far greater resources than the FIA could ever have. So Horner reckons this back-channeling by F1 teams is actually quite an important element of ensuring that everyone is complying with the rules. With the FIA giving McLaren's brake system the all clear for now, it could be that we now see a brief truce break out between McLaren and Red Bull as they knuckle down for the next chapter of their F1 battle. But with F1's flexi-wing clampdown just around the corner at next month's Spanish Grand Prix and expectations of that potentially having a major impact on the competitive order at the front, it may not be long before the next round of bickering begins.